VisualPony the narrator. Reading for you since 2013.
The Lunar Cypher, Chapter 2. The Battle in the Badlands. I received a far more coherent report from Captain Speedwell. The Dawn Patrol had spotted the mass of misshapen creatures just a few leagues ahead of us. Most of them scuttled and crawled over the ground, but there were a substantial number of flyers. They didn't quite number into the thousands, as Rainbow Dash had claimed, but there were hundreds more than had been reported by the Dodge Junction Pegasi. Fortunately, most of them weren't very good flyers. The misshapen black things floundered through the air like sun-dazed bats, or, in the case of ones shaped sort of like spiral umbrellas, rotated through the air in a ridiculous fashion. But they all possessed spikes, claws, and fangs, and they outnumbered us by an order of magnitude.
They pulled in, concentrating over the ground at once when we approached,
the captain told me. Good, I said, thinking aloud. Then we may be able to keep them bunched up by threatening the groundlings. Threaten only, Captain. Don't lose the advantage of height, and don't let either wing be surrounded. Pick off any stragglers if it's safe to do so, but leave the main attack to Luna, the unicorns, and myself. Always keep your troops out of the fire lane directly in front of the Even Star.
Understood, Your Highness. Blue and green wings are ready to launch on your command.
Thank you, Captain. Where is Princess Luna? I asked, tightening the last strap on my armor.
She's on the bridge, Your Highness,
he said with a flat expression.
Trying to stamp holes in the deck.
Ah. I hurried forward, followed by Rainbow Dash and the captain. We found Luna glaring out of the forward ports at the scattering of distant dots above the horizon.
Commander on deck!
The helm's pony snapped out as he saw me come through the hatchway. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I had settled into ruling my own realm well enough, but all the shouting involved in military operations still startled me. It also took a second for me to realize that he was talking about me. I took a deep breath. Ready the ship for battle, Captain. I was speaking to Captain Zephyr, who commanded Even Star. The third captain on board, Captain Lightning Lance, commanded the Unicorn Guards and was at his station in the forward dorsal copula. I know it's kind of confusing, but that's the way the military does things. Captain Zephyr barked out a few curt orders into a speaking tube, and a crew pony opened the hatches on either side of the bridge. Captain Speedwell saluted me and went aft to join his squadron, snapping out,
Rainbow Dash, with me!
As he left the bridge. I went and stood next to the starboard hatch, the wind whipping my tail against my legs. Luna stood by the port hatch and glanced in my direction every few seconds as we slowly approached the monstrous horde.
All ponies to battle stations, standing by for your command, Princess,
the captain said a minute or so later. Thank you, Captain. I tried to estimate our distance from the enemy. They looked less like a spill of pepper across the sky and more like scurrying ants, but the clear desert sky didn't give me much in the way of a frame of reference. A minute later I could make out the different flying types by their patterns of motion, if not by their shapes. The ones on the ground were clearly visible by then. The rising sun cast Even Star's shadow across them and they looked up. Well, the ones that had eyes did. 12 furlongs out. 8. 4. It was time to go. Go! I shouted and threw myself out of the ship, flapping hard for altitude. I saw the Pegasi fan out to my right and left as they spilled out of the aft hatches, streaking forward to flank the swarm of enemy flyers. Luna rose beside me with nostrils flaring and eyes blazing with excitement. I called up my shield spell as I climbed, and when I reached the apogee of my planned course, I recreated the magical buzzsaw spell I had improvised against Chrysalis back in the ruined city. I distorted the shield, reducing the defining points to only a few. As I dove into the cloud of monsters, I put momentum into the shield, spinning it until the points shrieked through the air. Think of a big fan. One of those huge industrial models that Mr. Breezy sells. Now imagine removing its wire blade guard and turning it all the way up. Now throw a large bucket full of grapes into the blades. Yes, it was just like that. I wasn't quite prepared for the amount of drag or the uneven torque transmitted to me by my collision with the swarm, and my flight path wobbled all over the place as I strove to force my way through the mass of creatures. Bolts of magic sizzled past me from the unicorns aboard Even Star, each dropping several flyers. I realized I was getting too close to the central fire zone and let myself drop lower than I originally planned. The bolts wouldn't harm me through my shield, but they would force me to use up more energy. Even at that early stage of the battle, I caught myself wondering if I would have enough to see it through. Luna flashed by me on my left, her courtiers striking monsters like a filly dragging a stick along a picket fence at a gallop. It takes a great deal of strength and skill to use courtiers effectively while maintaining controlled flight, but Luna was an expert at it. I couldn't swear to it, but I thought I heard her singing as she went by. Her ancestral guards followed in her wake like ducklings behind their mother. Savage, terrifying ducklings. I fought my way clear of the crowded airspace and dropped my shield to conserve energy as I met up with Blue Wing on the right flank.
Are you alright, princess?
Captain Speedwell called to me.
I'm just fine,
I said between big gulps of air.
How is it going here?
One casualty on the way back to Even Star, otherwise good. We've taken out dozens of the things so far.
I saw Rainbow Dash hovering behind the captain and immediately felt guilty for being relieved that the wounded pony wasn't her.
Carry on,
I replied.
I'm going up for a second pass.
As I rose above the churning battle, I saw the swaths we had cut through the sky with just our first assault and felt greatly encouraged. My Pegasi were much faster and more agile than the floundering monstrosities, and that made each encounter a one-on-one fight. The dark creatures lacked the maneuverability to gang up on their quicker attackers despite their numerical superiority. I let my breathing slow a bit before I cast my shield again, and then I dropped through the mass of them at a steeper angle for my second pass, letting gravity do a lot of the work for me. The tactic worked very well, so I repeated it on my next two runs. The third time I had more difficulty slowing down after my dive, and that put me even lower at the end of the run. I got a good close look at the larger horrors that slithered, crawled, scuttled and squelched along on the ground. No two of them were alike. The only thing they had in common was a lack of symmetry and general hideousness. At the center of the horde was a truly enormous thing that looked like the worst bits of a spider, a slug and a stingray all stitched together. Hideous doesn't even begin to cover it. Why does anything need that many eyes?
Twilight, beware!
I had been so distracted by Big Ugly that I hadn't noticed the rain of angry flyers dropping down from above. Evidently getting too close to the groundlings was a no-no, and the flyers were intent on explaining that to me. I had time to give an acknowledging nod to Luna before they slammed into me. I hadn't dropped my shield, of course, so I let the swarm run into me, thinking it would just save some time and effort on my part. That was a mistake. Even as my magical weapon shredded them, they shoved me so hard that I was driven down to within range of Big Ugly. I didn't see the attack, but I most certainly felt it. I was wrenched around so sharply that my neck and back lit up with pain and my shield stopped spinning. Its points had become stuck in the huge flap of skin that had extruded like a frog's tongue from the back of the giant monster below me. The flesh of the pseudo-tongue had suffered for it. Much of it was torn into greasy ribbons that were oozing a dark, vicious liquid, but the sheer mass of meat had absorbed all the energy I had put into my shield. So great was the shock from the sudden transfer of momentum that I nearly lost concentration and dropped my spell. That would have been very, very bad. The tongue-like flesh began to curl around my shield and retract back into the mass of the Big Ugly's main body, and flyers ramming into the now unrotating but still sharp shield were continuing to knock me around.
Twilight!
Blasts of midnight blue magic crackled around me, burning away the flyers and cutting at the tongue. But I could see that it wasn't going to be enough to free me before I was pulled into contact with Big Ugly. I waited until the next of Luna's blasts hit, then when the tattered flesh recoiled from the flare of energy, I dropped my shield and called up a teleport spell. It almost wasn't enough space. Just as I opened the vortex, I felt a heavy impact on my right shoulder. I reappeared around 300 feet up and halfway towards the right flank of the battle. I glanced at my shoulder and saw a smear of dark ichor across the metal, but I felt only a slight sting of pain. The armor had done its job. I looked around for Luna and found her just as a second wave of flyers mobbed her. She was driven down even as she tore dozens of the creatures apart with her courtiers and armored hooves. Her cestrals darted in and out, slashing at the incoming flyers. I wasted several seconds expecting her to disengage before I acted, and Big Ugly's bleeding tongue whipped through the spot she and her guards had been only a fraction of a second after I teleported them all to my side. Luna was a mess. She was drenched in the greenish-black gunk that served as the monster's blood, and her armor was dented in several places, but she didn't seem to notice or care.
Twilight, thou art safe. Good.
I gasped.
I'm good. How about you?
Grabbing 3 armored ponies from that distance, plus the potential energy put into the additional altitude, had cost me a lot of energy, and I was lightheaded and unsteady on my wings.
A moment to catch my breath and I will to the fray again,
she said. Her guards said nothing, but they smiled their pointed smiles.
Right.
I grinned at her. It would have been incredibly unfair if she hadn't been tired too.
Let me get my shield up and spinning and we'll hit them again.
Luna held out her wing to stop me and said,
Perhaps thou shouldst see to thy troops.
Oh, right. Just because I could wield one of the most effective weapons, it didn't relieve me of my duty to coordinate the action. It was not only good advice, but would also give my magic a bit of time to recharge. I had gotten carried away with the excitement of battle. Mistake number 2.
Of course, follow me.
I led them away up to where Captain Speedwell's Pegasi were regrouping and asked him for a report. It was hard to believe that we had only been fighting for a little over 15 minutes. Despite my personal miscalculation, we were doing remarkably well. The number of the flyers had been reduced so far that the Pegasi were on the offensive and looking to finish them off in very short order. Only a few more Pegasi had been wounded, and the combat had gotten so close and crowded that the unicorns aboard Even Star had stopped firing. I considered the situation for a moment and then came to a decision.
Captain, send word to Captain Zephyr to bring Even Star forward and start bombarding the creatures on the ground. Have Green Wing continue to harass any stragglers in the sky and use Blue Wing as a screen for Even Star until the flyers are no longer a threat. Do not engage any of the groundlings directly. Leave that to the unicorns or find some big rocks to drop if any ponies got energy left to burn.
I kept on the right flank and switched to using precision blasts of magic. It was only another 10 minutes before the sky was clear and we went to work on the remaining monsters on the ground. We had gotten rid of all of the smaller ones and put a big dent in the larger ones when we got a very nasty surprise. I was leading a small detachment of Pegasi, looking for targets of opportunity when it happened. Big Ugly, looking ragged and abused, still had one last trick to pull. As I circled around to its left flank, its forward end began to swell and it reared up, lifting several hundred feet into the air, swinging to point directly at Even Star.
What's it doing?
Rainbow Dash asked from behind me. I had no idea what was going on, but I was absolutely sure it wasn't anything I was going to enjoy. I let loose a full-powered blast at Big Ugly's bulging business end, and Luna added her own a split second later. The swollen flesh ruptured where we hit it, and a mass of newly created flares erupted outward. Big Ugly had been going to spit them all directly at Even Star, but luckily our magic blasts had cut through the side of it, so the swarm was spewed to one side right at us. I managed to get a shield up just before they hit us. It was just a plain, spherical bubble of force, scattering the attackers rather than hurting them. The effort of opposing so much kinetic energy made me a bit dizzy, and my shield wobbled and rippled like something cast by a novice, but at least it kept us safe. Luna banged her nose on the inside of the shield, and her war cry turned into a hiss of frustration. Faced with no less than a couple hundred attacking monstrosities, her instinctual response had been to charge them.
Wait!
I shouted at her and Rainbow Dash.
Let's get us above them, then we attack!
Luna looked around at the small group and nodded.
Let me move us. You have been teleporting too often, too many, and too quickly. You will exhaust yourself.
I didn't have the energy to argue. The fact that I was still in the air was probably due to pure adrenaline.
Fine, I'll drop my shield just as your vortex forms. That should keep us from getting swarmed.
Luna nodded and cast the spell so quickly I almost missed the timing. She certainly had energy to burn. The 7 of us winked in above and behind the new swarm as it organized itself, banked and headed for Even Star. Dash and the 2 Pegasi dove into them, courtiers lashing out. I thought Luna's guards would have followed, but they stayed right with their mistress as she and I threw bolts of magic as fast as we could fire. It was a huge waste of energy. Each bolt could have fried a dozen monsters, but they were so scattered that we mostly hit only one each. and there wasn't time enough to keep them all from reaching the airship. Blue Wing met the monsters a furlong or so out, but they were so outnumbered that dozens of flyers streaked right past them. At that point, Luna and I had stopped firing for fear of hitting the ship or our own ponies, so we flew after them in pursuit. A teleport would have been quicker, but any scrap of energy I had left was too precious to waste. At least our diversion of Big Ugly's swarm had given the airship's crew time to prepare for the assault. Captain Lightning Lance had ordered the hatches partially closed where the unicorns were stationed so they could fire out without risking getting overrun, but they couldn't cover the entire exterior of the ship and leathery creatures were already landing all over its surface. Worse, many of the creatures had found the aft hatches that had been left open for returning, wounded Pegasi. When I realized what was happening, I teleported into the starboard bunk room and got smacked around a bit as my exit vortex jittered violently in order to land me in an open space. I lashed out with my hoofs just to clear enough space to tell what was going on and then slammed the hatches closed with my telekinesis, crushing quite a few monsters in the process. I had mirrored my telekinesis on the port side of the ship even though I couldn't see into the bunk room there. I desperately hoped that only dark creatures had been in those hatches when they came crashing shut. With all the shouting, kicking Pegasi surrounding me, it was impossible to make any sense of the general cacophony. I couldn't let loose with blasts of force inside the ship, so I grabbed monsters with my magic, tore them off of their intended victims and wadded them up into a jumbled mass. They felt too rubbery to crush effectively, so I heated them to the near point of ignition instead. That seemed to do the trick, but the smell was appalling. Then I dashed across the central passageway into the port bunk room and repeated the process. Even Star jolted and slewed around as I finished cooking the remaining flyers. I was gasping for air and my head was aching from the overuse of magic, but the monsters didn't seem inclined to give me the time for a little nap. So I gritted my teeth and teleported back outside to see what was happening. The port steering fan was in tatters and there were several holes in the outer envelope. There was no way to tell if any of the gas cells had been punctured. I thought about casting a shield around the ship, but as tired as I was, maintaining a large displaced shield wouldn't leave me any energy to do anything else. I swooped down to just outside the forward copula and called out to Captain Lightning Lance.
Captain, order your unicorns to stop firing and cast a shield around the Even Star. Protect the ship and the wounded. Hunt down any of the things that got inside and wait for my orders.
I was already banking away as he acknowledged me with a salute and a crisp,
Yes, Highness.
Unfortunately, my spur-of-the-moment plan also prevented the unicorns from firing on anything outside the shield.
Luna!
I screamed. She teleported to my side almost instantly.
Twilight, we have to finish off the big groundling before it can vomit out more horrors. We're the only ponies with magic out here now.
The Pegasi Ancestrals kept the flyers off of us as best as they could while we dove in for pass after pass. Neither Luna nor I could waste precious magical energy by teleporting, so we just dodged the spikes, tentacles and whips that Big Ugly formed out of its bulk and lashed at us. The couple of glancing hits I took made me swear to myself to practice acrobatic flying much more often. Luna saw the second bulge forming and we dove side by side, hammering bolts of magic into it. Big Ugly's skin ruptured, but we kept on firing, burning away the mass of flyers while they were still tightly packed and unable to avoid our blasts. We were dangerously close to the ground and traveling at high speed by the time we were sure we had gotten them all. Pulling up and out of the dive made my wings and shoulders burn with the effort and my flight became so erratic that I thought I was going to lose control. I did, briefly, but I held out until I was climbing again, folded my wings and let momentum take over. When I reached apogee and began to fall, I opened my wings again and banked away from the monster. I desperately wanted to just glide down and take a long nap on the soft, gore-spattered sand, but Big Ugly was still kicking. Well, crawling and rising actually. And I needed to stop it more than I needed to pass out, so I kept banking until it was in front of me again, lit my horn and dove again. I don't know how long it took us. Too long is probably the right answer. There was no climatic moment of victory, no last bellow of rage from the hideous thing. It just finally slumped down into a steaming heap and stopped moving. But we were taking no chances. Luna and I kept firing until our horns were barely glimmering, spitting out pitiful little gouts of force. While we had been pummeling Big Ugly, the Pegasi and Luna's Cestrals had finished off the flyers. But it hadn't been an easy task. Nearly a dozen of them lay wounded on the ground. Wounded or worse. A signal to Captain Lightning Lance to dismiss a shield around Evenstar, and Captain Zephyr immediately dropped the ground anchors and began winching down. 2 Pegasi wearing medical saddlebags dove out of the rear hatches and headed for the ground. Captain Speedbell had some of his Pegasi circling the area, keeping watch for any of the small groundlings that might have escaped notice, while he and the rest tended to the wounded. Luna and I landed next to the captain. I staggered as my legs took my weight, and the wave of nausea that hit me nearly made me vomit. I hung my head between my forelegs and squeezed my eyes shut, breathing deeply until I felt a bit better.
Do you need a medic, Highness?
The captain asked.
No, I'm just tired.
You're wounded.
He pointed out, gesturing to the streak of blood on my right foreleg.
Really?
Stars and moon, I sounded like an idiot. It turned out that Big Ugly's slap on my shoulder had driven the edge of my armor into me so hard that it had cut my skin through the padding. It was a shallow, trivial wound, but it had bled like crazy before it had crusted over. I shook my head.
It's fine. I'm fine. I'll bandage it later. What about them?
I gestured at the scattered wounded.
How can we help?
Healing spells?
My guards have potions in their kits, Luna told him.
We've used them already, Your Majesty. Thank you.
I know a few palliative spells, but I don't know how much energy I can put into them right now,
I said.
Anything would be a help, Your Highness,
he said, and then added,
You might want to...
His clipped tone softened as he pointed to one of the downed Pegasi with a wingtip.
To see to your friend.
I looked at the pony he was pointing to. Her golden armor hid her sky blue coat, but there was no mistaking the colorful stripes of her mane and tail. Author's note. I just want to assure you that, although this story is tagged dark, and is more serious in tone than the Celestia Code, it will never stray into grim dark territory. Again, much appreciated assistance was given by Academic Pony, Mac is Best 859, Jojito, and Status, who beat me over the head until I wrote a better climax to the battle. Comment time, everyone. Okay, what can I say? Yeah, first of all, I have a Patreon. Link is in the description. Check it out. You can support me. Yeah, what else can I say here? First of all, you won't understand some of the references if you haven't listened to the Celestia Code, which is also on my channel. Link is, as always, in the description. But there's something else here. I won't say much here, but I want your opinion on this. Whose fault do you think it is that this battle went south? Because it did. It really did go south. Who would you blame? Celestia? Luna? Or maybe Twilight? Personally, I do have an opinion on this, but I won't say it here. Sincerely yours, VisualPony, and let me know in the comments what you think.